Welcome everyone to Word on the Street Live. This week we're doing a taped episode. We have Jeremy is out of pocket today, so you are just stuck with me. He'll be back next week actually with a panel on back to school with J Street U students about all the things happening on college campuses and the challenges that these students still face dealing with both anti-Semitism, the reaction to the war in Gaza, and everything else. And I've always found in my time at J Street. Anti-Semitism, sort of the J Street U students are just some of the most fascinating people to talk to. But along those lines, today we have with us Randi Weingarten. Randi, welcome to the show. We're very excited to have you.
I'm very excited to be with you, Ilan. Thank you.
So a little bit about Randi, who needs no introduction whatsoever, but we're going to do it anyway. So Randi serves, nearly 2 million public school educators as the president of the American Federation of Teachers, where she's held that post since 2008, and she's got a long career, obviously working these issues, representing teachers and unions, and very relevant to J Street. She is on our board. She's our vice chair. She's been very involved and a longtime supporter of J Street. And she has a new book coming out, Why Fascists Fear Teachers, Publication and the Future of Democracy. So that is why we have Randi on the show today. So Randi, welcome. And I'd really love to start by just kind of asking you, you and I have known each other for a while and always seem to cross really on Israeli-Palestinian issues and on Jewish issues, which is not something I expected because I've known who you are for a long time. Like, but this is not how I think of you. But maybe tell the audience like that connection of yours and why you're so involved in these issues.
So, it's such a different time today, Ilan, than it was as I was growing up. But I was one of those kids who could not stop. I mean, I was born Jewish. I'm proud to be Jewish. As people know, I am married to a rabbi. I try to be at shul as many Friday nights as I can. She was a congregational rabbi for over 32, 33 years at Congregation CBST. So, but when I was younger, I tried to observe Shabbos and Kashrut. Not so much anymore, but I really believed that Judaism for me was not just a really important aspect of my life, but it was a really important way of being and of studying and of understanding and just, even think about it in terms of my politics, our politics on immigration. You embrace the stranger. You embrace education. We tried to do good, and even as a young kid, I grew up in Rockland County. I mean, we experienced anti-Semitism, not just on taking off the Jewish holidays, but on our house being pelted by eggs and things like that. And being called names. And so I spent a lot of time as a young kid really trying to read whatever I could on the Holocaust and why. And as a family that came from Ukraine, came from Poland, listened to, my grandparents and what they said about all of that, it became very important to me. The state of Israel became very important to me, as it did to so many of our generation and the generation before me, about its importance for the Jewish people and its importance as a foundation stone to have a country of one own. As I say that, I think about how Donald Trump misuses that and creates, his anti-Semitic slurs are so replete, and yet the right wing never looks at any of them or the people he consorts with. So this became important and really important. And I remember my grandmother was going to take me on a trip to Israel that was supposed to start. I was leaving school, was supposed to start a few days after the Yom Kippur War. And I remember being in synagogue on Yom Kippur and like finding a radio and listening to all of what was going on. So, it just it was really important. Don't know if I, called myself a Zionist then or a progressive Zionist, and I'm sure I didn't, but that connection was really important. I went to Israel with Camp Ramah on, in between my junior and senior year of high school. I thought seriously about a year in Israel. I thought seriously about Aliyah. And so that was what I thought about in my formative time. But thank God on some levels, and I'm not saying it, obviously, just because I'm on a J Street podcast. It was clear, we in the labor movement, we were very close to Rabin. It was clear that this was a place that where just like we needed a homeland, so too do Palestinians. Just like we had a right to the land, so too do others. And the whole notion of how this pre-October 7th, of how you try to work to create the kind of self-determination and justice that you see in Israel's Declaration of Independence for all. It became really important to me. And, fast forward many, many, many decades and years, you know, every time I'd be in Israel before J Street, we would, be engaged in making Israel a better place as much as we could. So, I kind of come to the advocacy, what I found, just like you and, so many others. I found that J Street gave me a home to to be my Jewish self and have a group of like-minded people on the advocacy of 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 Jews having a homeland, but Palestinians having a homeland as well, and how to do this and how to fight back, not only in our own country to fight back for a democracy that works for all, opportunity that works for all, dignity that works for all, and I would actually add affordability now, but how to do that advocacy through J Street in terms of the state of Israel and in terms of, recognizing, I believe, a Palestinian state. So it's a kind of long and winding road for me, but I do still, and I will still I may be, I think, one of the last remaining Jewish labor leaders. At one point or another, you had many Jewish labor leaders, and I often spend a lot of time with non-Jews trying to explain the fear that we have inside ourselves about another Holocaust, and that it may be an irrational fear, it may be a rational fear, but people see Jews, I'll end this way, as a privileged class. And we see ourselves, if I may, or let me just talk about me.
Yeah.
I see myself, so many of the people I grew up with, we see ourselves as one government away from a gas chamber. And people, and that's why the notion, not just the real aspects of anti-Semitism, but the fear about it, when you see a Trump and others weaponizing it, it is so infuriating, because anti-Semitism is real. We have to fight it, not have it weaponized.
Yeah, no, and I should say, yes,
A very long answer to a
no,
very
no,
complicated question.
it
Sorry.
is. Well, that's what, but it was great. And I had a couple of reactions to it. One is, I totally hear you on this. It's one of the complexities I always try to explain to people is like, yes, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, like the Israelis and the Jews, like in Israel, have kind of the upper hand in terms of the power dynamic with Palestinians. But at the same time, they are such a traumatized people, they don't see it that way. And that's one of the things that just makes
Exactly.
so complicated. And the other thing, just as you were talking, that I thought about, Randy, is I remember you coming in. It was just a few months after October 7th when I was working at the White House, working for the vice president, and he brought a group of Israelis and Palestinians who
Yeah.
working together on things,
Standing together.
getting together. And that was such a dark, on a personal level, that was such a dark time. Like we were dealing with such horrible things, like especially early in the war, where it just, I mean, it's stayed dark, but at that time, like almost nobody was coming in with like Israelis and Palestinians together. And I just really appreciated on a personal level you setting up that meeting because it was really great in the middle of all that darkness to get like an hour with people who,
Hmm.
were trying to project something very different, even like right after October 7th.
I mean, you say this a lot. My wife, Sharon Kleinbaum, Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, says this a lot. I've now kind of absorbed it, which is we have to reject the binary. And as and we are we can we are as human beings, we are capable of that. And and we have to feel everyone's pain and try to operate from a way of seeing a future that is better than right now, not through rose-colored glasses. But that's why I find, and I don't know if you do, Elon, but like every time I go to Israel, I try to go to one of the hand-in-hand schools. I try to see the work that they do as a essentially biracial, bilingual school with Palestinians and Jews learning together, acting together, operating together. I try to meet with Standing Together, which is a group of Jews and Palestinians that are trying to get to a third way. And every time any of them come to the States, Parent Circle, Hand in Hand, Standing Together, we try to create a home within the AFT and obviously the labor movement there. But it is the way of seeing basic humanity and people as real. And in some ways, it kind of gets to, I didn't mean it this way, but in some ways, what fascists do, Tim Snyder has said this, Jason Stanley, anybody who, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, anybody who studies fascists or strongman men, it's that they in they do this us versus them, and the them, they not only divide, but they demonize and dehumanize to the extent that the them become so little, so feared, or and so undermined, and like they become specks, like they become mice. I mean, I often think about, just for non-Jews, when I explain fascism, I say, okay, think about what Hitler did in having Jews in Austria wash the streets, being on their knees and washing the streets. Think about that image was to dehumanize and to make them into specks like mice. And that's what, and that's kind of like you hear it and you see it into the dehumanizing that Ben Gavir does of, pe- of people he hates, the dehumanizing that gets done of Gazans. And we this is a spectrum, and we have to fight back against dehumanizing. So part of the fight back is to actually humanize and to actually lift up the communities that you are with. So there was a method to my madness when you were in that to bring Standing Together to the White House so that people saw how we try and nurture those relationships.
Yeah, and look, I'll just say, like, as a government official, you spend way too much time just going into, government office buildings and not enough time ever doing stuff like that. Even when you're on visits, and so it's one of the things since I've joined J Street that we've had an opportunity to do, and we take all of our delegations on, being able to do, those types of engagements exactly, both to see the hope and also to just see the humanity.
Yeah.
But let's let it transition. To your book, which we started talking about. The book is called Why Fascists Fear Teachers.
I just got, I mean, it's out next week, so I just got a few copies. I used to love when I watched authors like rip open their boxes. So
Yeah.
I got to do that.
No, it's great. It's super fun. That's like that moment of like, oh, it
Yeah,
looks nice and
yeah,
it's actually real, right?
yeah.
So yeah, tell us like, the main purpose of the book I know is really to talk about how important, teachers are in fighting fascism and the role that they play, but tell us about the book.
So I was, I was on a different podcast yesterday, and someone asked me the question of why did you title the book "Why Fascists Fear Teachers" as opposed to "Why Teachers Fear Fascists"? And the difference is simply this: what we do in society as educators is we try and help give students, you know, um, the skills and knowledge they need. We try to create conditions that make them want to learn and ready to learn and engaged in learning. And we try to create a safe and welcoming environment so we see them and they feel like their whole selves. And so they're ready to fly, to soar, to thrive. That's what teachers do. And what fascists do, and here's a spoiler alert, I do not label any particular, I do this intentionally, I say in the book, I do not label any particular person a fascist because I didn't want the conversation of the book to be, is he or isn't he? I talk about fascistic behaviors. And I let people, just like we really believe in critical thinking, let people come to their own conclusions. Teachers should be teaching how to think, not what to think. And so but what happens in a country like ours, but seriously, but in countries that have not only engaged in democratic backsliding, but maybe never were democracies in the first place, this fascistic tendency of us versus them, the propaganda, the misinformation, the disinformation, the dismantling of public education, the dismantling of society, the dismantling of the things that create and give us ways to build community. What is it? Why? There is this huge fear of what we do, this huge fear of critical thinking. Something, by the way, for those who believe in classical education, that is what the founders and framers wanted more than anything else. They understood, yes, they were not perfect. We had slavery then. Women didn't have the right to vote. But they understood that the key to freedom, the key to actually making sure there were no kings was education. And whether it was Jefferson or Washington or Franklin or Madison, they all talked about the importance of civics and of education. So, why do fascists fear teachers? Because they fear what we do. They fear that we teach kids how to think. They fear critical thinking. They fear that teachers attempt to create a safe and welcome environment, free from distractions, free from guns, free from ways that people can see each other. They fear that we create broad-based opportunity. One more thing they really fear is that teachers are more unionized than any other profession in the United States of America. And the way in which people, regular people in life, have any power in life, if you're not, a billionaire or successful business person, it's education, it's voting and elections and who you elect. And the other thing for most of us mere mortals, it's being in a labor union and having collective bargaining. So they fear that. So I kind of go through a lot of this and I try to do it. Last thing I'll say is I try to do it through the lens of stories about teachers, the names of whom you don't know, like a Barbara Johns, who was one of the plaintiffs in Brown versus Board of Education, one of the plaintiffs of those lawsuits, never got to go to an integrated school, but became a librarian and a school teacher in the city of Philadelphia. Ryan Richmond, who is a teacher in New Hampshire, and Raphael Bonhomme, who's a teacher in Washington, D.C., who teach civics and who have tried to get through this, frankly, I think, undermining of the teaching of civics when people say no divisive concepts. Anyone who's ever taken history is full of divisive concepts. I mean,
Yep.
that is what
Yep.
history is.
Yep.
So I try to actually talk about real people, tell their stories, and about who educators are, because the second piece was not just a recognition and understanding of what's going on right now and why teachers are being smeared so much, but the second piece is a real love that I have for who educators have been and are, throughout history. And yes, of course, public school educators, because that's who I am and that's who I represent and serve, but also anyone who has taught.
And so, Randy, let me like follow up with one question. You started to get at this, but if there are like specific stories from the book or like vignettes that you want, anything you wanted to share with folks, even in more detail, I always find those to be the most interesting part of like personally reading a book. And I've always found when you really personalize, like that's what gets through to folks. So if there's a,
Yeah.
specific example you want to, put out there, I'm like interested to hear it.
Well, let me just give you the paperclip story.
Mhm.
Not not that I was ready with a prop, Elon, but let me just give you. I we almost put the paperclip on, on the cover of the book, because this story, I think this story has, I have carried the story for a very long time. So in 1940, and this is on page one, in 1940, as your audience knows, Hitler had gained power and territory across a widening swath of Europe. And in Norway, the Nazis put a puppet government into place. And the first to protest the Nazi takeover of Norway were the country's teachers. And since pins and badges with the likeness of the king were now illegal, this is what teachers and students used: a clever, subtle signal to show their resistance. They wore paper clips, and when they wore it on their lapels, it signified that they remained united, bound together like a stack of papers against the Nazi rule. Just a paperclip. And then there were 14,000 teachers at that time in Norway. 14,000, 12,000 wore it. And of course, the Nazis went nuts about this and tried to stop them, and had increasingly repressive ways of trying to stop them, including closing schools. And they put some of the leaders in concentration camps and in forced labor camps, but they kept wearing paper clips and they kept teaching. And that, and what I get from that story, look, I'm going to fight like hell, as our educators throughout the country, not just for the opportunity for kids to thrive, not just for an America that where everyone can see the American dream, you can see, feel, and believe it's possible, but also, against fascism or authoritarianism and all this backsliding, like our union is heavily engaged in the next No King's Day on October 18th.
Mhm.
But the stories that it is a reminder, even in the deepest, darkest repression of totalitarianism, that everyone can do something. And that is a story that I carry with me all the time, because it's so dark, and yet the paperclip. And so, it would, it's, we have not yet found, lots of people are on the street these days in America. We have not yet found the one, symbol that we all have that unifies all of us. But these communities that come together and protest, are really what we need to do to fight against fascism. But it's both a story about how important community is. That's why I think the right wing so tries to go after public schools, because public schools are the center of community. Vouchers are used much more as a device to undermine public schools and defund public schools than they are a device to help kids learn. If they were a device to help kids learn, you'd have a lot more accountability about it, and you wouldn't have the, the terrible statistics that one has in terms of vouchers. Having said that, I understand why and respect why some parents would send their kids to private schools. Some of it is religion, some of it is safety, some of it is, I heard a story a couple of days ago about a parent who said there's just too much damn test prep in a public school. And so I'm not, but ultimately, the notion that the Norwegian story says to me, the paperclip story says to me, is that the power of community and the power of education. So I got lots of other stories that are not that dramatic, but it is so impactful what people do, what educators do.
Yeah, and it's actually like a kind of an interesting segue, I think, from there. With the two things we've talked about so far. And hopefully nobody's hearing. I'm doing this from home today, and we have some like racket going on upstairs. So like, a bathroom that's leaking and things. So
I'm not hearing it.
that's good. That's good if you're not hearing it, because I'm starting to hear banging and I'm like, but sound is fine, they tell me. That's good to hear. We'll have, this is part of like, we're not doing this live, but still, this is part of the fun of lot of
Yeah.
audio shows that we do it now. But transitioning on from that and the connection with the two things we've talked about so far, actually, which is, teachers fighting against fascism, and, your Judaism and background, and the importance of these issues, right? We have a moment now in this country where, we have people, Donald Trump and his administration, using, accusations of anti-Semitism to go after education, right? To
Right.
pursue this agenda. And maybe the best place, so I'm really interested to get your take on all this, but I think maybe the best place to start is a congressional hearing yesterday where you had Representative Wahlberg calling, saying you don't fight against anti-Semitism. Which, I mean, if you knew anything about you at all, just like the most basic research,
Yeah. I
would
mean,
would have.
even Grok, when you go to Grok, and I love it. Even Grok said to somebody sent this to me. Sorry, I'm not wearing my glasses,
Yeah.
but it says there's a title in Grok when you ask, has Randi Weingarten ever spoken against anti-Semitism? Title, direct condemnation of anti-Semitic incidents. So even their favorite, AI generation could have given him the information. You
But
don't even have to do a Google search or a chat GPT search. Just go to Grok.
that's, I mean, yeah, like, maybe the most anti-Semitic of all the AIs. Still.
Exactly. Exactly. I
Um,
mean,
mhm.
I look, so something is brewing when when two names, a lot of people know that Pompeo called me the most dangerous person in the world, which was, I mean, if he wasn't the head of the CIA at one point or another, or the, Secretary of State, you'd laugh about it, but that he knows better. And, he did it in terms of, again, this divide, this demonizing, there's two ways of operating in life. You can demonize your enemy and say you are the strong man, and you are, or demonize problems and follow me, I'm the strong man. That's the Trump way of doing it. Or you could actually try to bring a country together and fight for a future that people deserve. I mean, those are kind of two different ways of operating. And 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 so if you hear the names Corey DeAngelis or Christopher Rufo, these are two of the operatives on the far right who try to do whatever they can to disassemble and undermine the ways in which regular folks have power. So I knew something was up when, Rufo has said, we're going after higher ed. Sorry, I'm not getting his exact words right. He has threatened to sue me at least once already on defamation because I forgot to say a comma at one point or another. But he said a few years ago that to create universal vouchers, to create basically the balkanization and the fragmentation of society and of schools, you create universal public school distrust, and you have to be ruthless and brutal about it. And just a few days ago, Corey DeAngelis who said something like, I'm assembling a team to dismantle teacher unions, you in. And at the very same time, you see this, chair of the education committee who basically has been in Congress since 2010. He should know better, you know, going after Becky Pringle and, because of what happened with the NEA and ADL, which Becky, I have to say, she has taken the steps to actually say, no, it was not right for us to boycott ADL. We may not have a partnership with ADL. It's not right. And she took the steps in very quick order to try to change that decision. I give her a lot of credit for that. We, at the same time, we, we've used ADL materials forever. And so, so you see that they're trying to demonize. But to say, to have no knowledge, and he and Elise Stefanik to try to say that a Jewish labor leader who everyone knows in this arena has attempted to fight hate in all its incarnations, and to try to smear me yesterday for people who don't know, and then use their avenues and their platforms to do that. That is what fascists do. That is what authoritarians do, to try and create fear on something that's not just objectively not true, but create that fear and then use that fear to deny and deprive rights. And what are the rights they're trying to deprive? People getting an education, people having the freedom of thought and knowledge.
Yeah, and you've seen it, of course, all across the country. You have,
I mean,
what's
that the irony was, as he was doing it that same day, Miss Papanik and I were doing a seminar fighting anti-Semitism. And I think next week I'm doing the same thing at the J Street conference. So
yeah.
it's just, sorry,
No,
it's
no, I
just
know. It's
pathetic
yeah, and infuriating.
and infuriating.
It's definitely nothing to apologize for. I do want to ask you one other question about this, which is kind of like, um, there's there's been anti-Semitism on the right for a long time. And Donald Trump has been enabling a lot of that. And he's been
Mhm.
using, concerns about anti-Semitism to pursue very much his own anti-education agenda, kind of authoritarian agenda. There has also been, look, especially since October 7th, this spike of anti-Semitism on the left,
Yes.
and in a challenge where there's also been, separate from a spike in anti-Semitism, legitimate but sometimes incredibly harsh criticism of the Israeli government, that's spilled into the progressive movement as a whole. And a lot of that is just that's up for debate, even if that can be very uncomfortable for Jews and sometimes places that people go that I would not go and I'm uncomfortable with, and I'm sure you are too. Um, how have you dealt with that as the leader of, like, one of the most important teachers unions, one of the most important unions in the country, and this challenge, because this is also what NEA was dealing
Hmm.
with this with these resolutions recently. It's a hard one.
So I try to start, and I frankly I learned this. Um, uh, I'm constantly trying to learn. I'm constantly trying to listen. And I really actually learned this after the 2016 election, which is, it's more important to have a values to action strategy and movement than just to have a laundry list of issues that you're fighting about. And so when it, because when you get to issues where you that or situations that are really, really, really tough, and take right now what is happening in Gaza in terms of kids and families being having no food. This is a horrible, terrible situation that that we all must act about. When, when, and so I don't think there's a question about that, but you have, even including, frankly, a member of my own family, thinks that, criticized me terribly for having a fundraiser for a group that we have worked with, and the State Department and others have worked with, and NDI has worked with for years and era, to actually get food into Gaza. And so, and so this is what I start with in every conversation I have with members about anti-Semitism, that we have to be doing literally four things at the same time. Number one, we have to fight against hate. We have to recognize hate and fight against it, whether it is anti-Semitism, whether it is racism, whether it's Islamophobia, whether it's homophobia. We have to fight against hate. That has to be our value system. And that means, and then number two, which gets closely aligned with it, and this is where some people start pushing back at me, that means as educators, we have to create, this is not precatory, this is mandatory. We have to create a safe and welcoming environment for the kids we teach, and we have to create it on campuses too, which means that if a Jewish teacher or a Palestinian student feels unsafe, we have to deal with that, regardless of what our other feelings are. Number three is, and frankly, it shouldn't get to somebody feeling unsafe. We have to create that kind of environment. Number three, we have to find a way that rights don't get abrogated in that regard, meaning First Amendment rights to protest. That is a really important right for Americans. Number four, and nonviolent, let me just say, nonviolent, peaceful protest. And even when I don't like, and I have a bunch of members, look, they say terrible things about me sometimes. I got a lot of members who say nice things about me. I have a lot of members who say that that's their right. And that's their right in America. And even if we don't like it. And then number four, we have to, in particularly, as kids get older or have more education, higher education has more academic freedom, certainly than elementary schools or than middle schools or high schools. Academic freedom is absolutely essential to innovation and to knowledge in America. You have to be able to take you have to be able to have the benefit of doubt and take the risk. How do you cure cancer if you do not have academic freedom? How do you do the kind of innovations that we've had in, until right now, the American university system, which until right now has been viewed as the best? So we have to fight for all four of those things at the same time and try to create models that do that. And that's part of the reason why Amy Spitanik from JCPA and we have a partnership to try to do that, because to get there, you have to create some common understanding that your own views on the subject should not create fight or flight if you're educators. And so we're trying to create examples. That's why we're doing all of these seminars. That's why we're working directly in certain places. That's why, when there are many times that I am on the phone with Jewish members, like from UTLA or from San Francisco, who feel a lot of pain from a leader and we're trying, and the leader then knows I, the national president, are on the phone with these folks because I want to hear their pain, and I want to be able to see if we can create a way out of it. Karen Martyr, the story of Karen Martyr from Hillcrest High School, which Karen and I wrote about, is a perfect example of that. She was the subject of a riot. Sharon and I went to visit her at home, and then we started creating a way that she and her kids could have real conversations where she, who is a supporter of Israel and had a sign up there, she had a right to do that outside of school. She should not have been the subject of a riot. That is anti-Semitism. But then how we create a way that she and her kids have a safe and welcoming environment. Now, I'll say one more thing, and this is where it gets, and I know you and I share this, which is clearly anti-Semitism is real. Clearly, there's all sorts of different views that people have about the conduct of Israel. Not everything, not every criticism clearly, when somebody says every criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, that is wrong, regardless of what is in the Holocaust definition. And the flip side is, if the only country in the world that you criticize is Israel and you've never criticized anywhere else, like if the only starvation you criticize is in Gaza and you've never criticized it anywhere else, then one has to recognize that there's something about that that is also has some roots in an anti-Jewishness. So this notion that the weaponization that happens here, that says anytime you do something about Israel, that is anti-Semitism, that then forces a college or university to disgorge millions of dollars, that's weaponization. But since the lines are not so bright, since take Colombia, and this is the last thing I say also, I'm sorry. And look, we
No, this
represent
is
the AAUP
fascinating.
in terms of Colombia. I mean, you're now seeing
Yeah.
many months of my discussions with people, basically pulled together in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Look, Colombia, Jewish students felt, not all, but there were many Jewish students who felt terrorized. Terrorized. You can't spit at a Jewish student because you hate what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing in Israel. That's crossing a line. You can't tell a Jewish student, go to the what I don't even want to say it here because somebody's going to take it and run with it. You
Yeah.
can't do that. That's anti-Semitism. And that's it's so bizarre to me because it's like the 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 people like think about what Glenn Youngkin did, saying, "Oh, we can't teach history in classrooms about slavery because it's going to make a white young man feel uncomfortable." Well, wouldn't that's where the whole divisive concept idea came from. No, we are better than this. That let's also teach the teach the joy of the fact that we got rid of slavery. So you can't do that. But the WEP and Colombia, which is frankly the Ivy that has more Jews going there than any other Ivy, didn't deal with anti-Semitism well enough. It didn't. But the remedy is completely wrong and misplaced. Don't take $200 million out. Don't shake down the college so that the research, the kids who are going there get hurt or have to pay higher tuition or you lose the research. So that's the weaponization that a guy like Trump is doing, or the weaponization that Stefanik or Wahlberg are doing, because they're trying to create fear where there's really a reality of anti-Semitism, but the fear that they're engendering is so great, you're actually making people less safe.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like for me, like the line is always like, look, hard conversations and discomfort in education are fine. This is how you learn sometimes,
Correct.
But there is that line, and some of the examples you're using, spitting on
Yeah,
people and like slurs, that's anti-Semitism. And
that's
and just yeah,
anti-Semitism.
Um,
And
so
but if you don't create for teachers,
mhm,
if you don't create an environment of trust, you never get to the next step. you're still back in fight or flight. And if anybody looked at my Facebook page yesterday for a couple of teachers who, I feel badly for them. They're so fearful that they don't even know what they're saying. And some people said, why, aren't you angry about it? I'm like, look, I feel bad that they're so fearful that, that their biases show up in so many awful, in terrible ways.
Yeah, it's brutal, and it feels like this conversation is happening in so many layers in American
Yeah,
society right now around Israel and Palestine, but
right,
it's like the education, it's like where it's
right.
almost the hardest.
But
Uh,
Wahlberg, he's
mhm.
the chair of a committee. And
Yes.
look, I know what this is about. They had already sent me a bunch of stuff. They're investigating the expenses of the union. They're investigating, whether, they're investigating, whether I take a car service and what that car service is called. They're investigating because they're trying to demonize and undermine. So this was all part of their demonization process.
Yeah. Well, on that happy note,
Shame on him, though.
yeah. No. So, Randy, thank you very much. And of course, shame on him.
Yeah,
Ridiculous.
yeah.
Thank you very much. This is really a great conversation, and really appreciate you taking this time with us. And remind everybody of the name of the book again.
So the name of the book is Why Fascists Fear Teachers, Public Education, sorry, and the Future of Democracy. It is actually out next Tuesday, September 16th. I know we're going to do something at the J Street Conference, which I am very, very, very honored and grateful for. And you can still pre-order it in the different ways that people pre-order, whether it's Bookshop or Amazon or your independent books, book dealers, or independent bookstores. And you can get it at whyfascistfearteachers.com. And thank you, Ilan, for this great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Randy. And now what we're going to do is let Randy go, and we're going to bring on my colleague Hannah Morris, our Vice President for Government Affairs. So who also regularly is talking to Randy and others.
Yeah,
For a, we talk about the hack and the wonk, Jeremy and I. So this week Hannah will play the role of the hack.
I'm happy to be the hack. That's what lobbyists are, right?
Yeah, no, I was like, I don't know. Jeremy like embraces it. I had to like clear with Hannah and just make sure, you okay if I call you a hack? Um,
I will own that title.
and so we'll do just a few minutes on kind of the regular news, what's happening in Israel and Palestine, and then also just what's happening on the Hill, for folks, and yeah, then maybe start with Hannah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let's go back to yesterday. I feel
Yeah.
like there was a lot of news following the Doha strike, and you know, all of us were pretty flabbergasted here in the office. Like, this is just next level crazy. I'd love to hear your analysis now, a day later. Like, what do we know? What do we now know about what the Trump administration says they know? So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the biggest difference between where we were, because we had Jeremy and Frank and I on yesterday doing a show. At the time, we didn't really know the role the Trump administration had played. Um, and now it appears, based on the statements that have come out from them, that they had no idea, which on the one hand is not that surprising because that is a bit of the Israeli MO, but on the other hand is completely shocking because like literally you had these Hamas leaders deliberating over an American proposal, right? And you also have the US with a major base in Qatar with all kinds of air assets. So you're going to fly Israeli planes in there. Um, Kind of crazy. And I don't know what kind of reaction exactly the Israelis were anticipating. This isn't like bombing Iran, which I think on the one hand, had the Trump administration somewhat, surprised and not super happy in the beginning, but then as things went well, they got happier and happier. Although I should just say, still strategically real questions about how that works out long term. But in this case, we're talking about a country that like Trump has a really good relationship with.
It's an ally, and like,
Yeah. you know? And so to do this and violate Qatari airspace, I think it's nuts, and it really like further it just undermines, we talked about this yesterday, it really undermines the American role. So it's been interesting to see the Trump administration come out pretty strongly against this and say they were not happy with how this all went down. But is it going to make any difference, right? Like,
Well,
is it
right. What happens for Gaza? Like, what does this mean for a ceasefire deal?
I mean, I think it like, I think it's we're what's very clear is that the Netanyahu government has no interest in the deal, is not prioritizing that, is not prioritizing getting the hostages out. And does I think it is their politics, but I also think they've now convinced themselves that taking out leaders is how we do things. Like we did it to Nasrallah, we did it in Iran, we can do it with Hamas, and this somehow solves your problem. But like it doesn't solve any of your problems, especially in Gaza, where new leaders just pop up. And where you really, if you want to actually like get at Hamas, you need a political plan, a security plan, a real day after plan. We've learned this, I'm like going to get blue in the face saying this, but just from so many different wars the United States has been engaged in. And so like whacking the bad guys just means you end up with more bad guys. I don't know if folks remember, like we had, the after we took out Saddam Hussein, we had like a, card deck with like 52 different Iraqi officials that got marked off one after the other, right? Like Saddam was like an ace. And like the US military got most of those folks. And you know what? We were still stuck in Iraq for 8 years and ultimately the entire invasion failed.
And this time the IDF didn't even get them, right? Like, so we're potentially in like the worst possible world here. Uh,
Right. Still, that piece is still like a little murky.
mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I'm not really much into negotiating. If the next negotiation offer that comes up, I'm really not gonna. If I'm a Hamas leader operative, I'm not gonna take so seriously. But so I wanted to, but that was I think the biggest thing. Hannah, and like from I think what's happened on the ground. Maybe what we can do is I also wanted to ask you a little
Yeah.
bit about some of the big things we're doing in Congress right now. We have J Street's, uh, upcoming advocacy day, like where we bring, for folks who don't know, we bring just a lot of our leaders to Washington, and then they spend a day on the Hill, amongst other things. And we can talk about a little bit some of our big priorities, and maybe use that also as opportunity to give folks a little bit of updates on what's happening on the ground.
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, we've been advocating for ages about the need to end this war, release the hostages, and surge aid. That's like a given. But at this point, where the Israeli government seems completely uninterested in a deal, where they're moving forward with this incursion into Gaza City, um, where the humanitarian situation is just so dire, where there's famine in different parts of Gaza. J Street has made clear that we believe there needs to be a prohibition on the use of US arms in Gaza. And that will be part of what we bring to members of Congress on Tuesday, making clear that this needs to be the next move in terms of legislation on the Hill. So that's first and foremost. And I do think there is a real appetite for that, for having a very, um, you know, a specific kind of legislation. It's not a full arms embargo. This is about the use of arms in Gaza. And what we're calling for is to have a condition that would allow that prohibition to end. So if Israel puts forward a very simple deal that would end the war in exchange for the hostages, that where Israel finally surges that aid, this, prohibition would end. And so that's a big ask of ours on the Hill is coming Tuesday. We're also going to be calling upon members to loudly oppose any de jure annexation that could, be proposed. Of course, we saw the Smotrich plan released last week. I can't believe it was just last week. That has been tabled, from what I understand, due in part to the UAE really sending out its signal that this could have huge consequences for the Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia as well. And so we want to make sure members are prepared for any potential annexation in like legal annexation, but we're also pushing for members to be very vocal about de facto annexation, the displacement of Palestinians from their land due to settler violence and intimidation, which has been skyrocketing since October 7th. There are two there's a really important bill in the House, the West Bank Violence Prevention Act. This bill would require the reimposition of the Biden-era sanctions on extremist violent settlers and anyone who creates instability in the West Bank. That now has 78 co-sponsors. It was introduced by Representatives Nadler, Ranking Member Adam Smith of the Armed Services Committee, and Ranking Member Jim Himes of the Intelligence Committee. That's also now been introduced in the Senate, which we're very excited about. It's a really important piece of legislation to have from a crew of senators who really represent the, moderate middle within the Senate Democratic Caucus. They also represent a group who have both voted for joint resolutions of disapproval and voted against them. So the leading senator who introduced this bill is Senator Booker. And he was joined by Senators Shaheen, who's the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Reid, the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, Senator Coons, who's very influential on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bennett. I mean, it's just a really, Warner as well, very, very influential group who has put their names behind this. And we have our advocates coming to the Hill to make sure that members understand that, this settler violence is these are intentional acts to basically prevent any establishment of a Palestinian state. So, I mean, happy to hear your thoughts on that too, but
Yeah, no. I mean, a couple of reactions. Like one on, you know, on the West Bank Sanctions Prevention Act. You do have, it's really interesting what's happening. A lot of our allies are putting in place these sanctions. There's news this week the EU is essentially banning Ben-Gvir and Smotrich from even being able to go in to Europe. These
fascinating.
are good things. We need to basically like raise the costs associated. And this is something that works. It was working during the Biden administration because especially when you get not just at individuals, but these things are funded by large organizations that are putting a lot of money and a lot of organization behind it. These violent settlers, people like to say they're like, oh, this is some misguided youth coming in from God knows where. That's what you hear, like other parts of Israel. Like, no, this is like systemic, and these guys show up, they build a caravan, they build a barbed wire fence, which takes a huge amount of land. They claim it, cut Palestinians off from their land, and then you know somehow these things all get very quickly connected to water and electricity. Like 16-year-old kids, like on their own, like my daughter's in high school, like she wouldn't be able to pull this off, like without like some serious help from like institutions, organizations. And the only other thing yeah, I mean, so there's that. And then, yeah, on annexation, the only other thing I'll say is as much as like we have seen at least the UAE and Saudi weigh in, like make somewhat of a difference, and important, put some brakes on it, like we just don't know. And I think we need members of Congress out there. We need American Jewish community out there. Like last time annexation was really on the table, it was 5 years ago. You had a very unified message from the American Jewish community. And we need that message today. I think it's harder in the
Yeah.
aftermath of October 7th. But it's just vital because of steps on that front. Hannah, I think we should talk a couple minutes about just statehood and what we're doing there.
Yeah.
And then I think we should
So
probably wrap since
that's
we have
another
really
huge
long
priority for us on our Advocacy Day. It comes up right before the UN General Assembly when the French will officially be doing their recognizing of Palestine. So we are going to be backing a letter that has been circulating by Representative Ro Khanna of California. And he was actually just on your
Yeah.
show, right?
Yeah, a few weeks ago he was on our show and like
Right.
we talked all about this. Yeah.
Right. So that letter encourages other countries, including the United States, to recognize Palestine. It importantly also acknowledges that the Palestinian Authority needs to continue on its path to continue its reform, including holding elections. So J Street will be, encouraging members to get on this letter and helping them understand why, as much as those who are against statehood are saying it's just symbolic, really understanding that this is meaningful to Palestinians, that recognition is a powerful tool to counter the unilateral actions the Israeli government has been taking, whether it's approval for settlements in E1, and what Smotrich said, that this will be the preventing move to prevent a Palestinian state, whether it's the Smotrich plan. Recognition is an important move by these countries to say, no, 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 Palestinian statehood will happen and we will ensure that. So, interestingly, I'm also happy to share that we expect a Senate vehicle on this, and that'll be happening hopefully in the next couple of days, and we'll be happy to get behind that as well. So there is a lot of growing anticipation on the Hill to demonstrate support to the Palestinian people for statehood.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to leave it at that with folks, since I think we're even over an hour. So I think I've violated some of the rules associated with this podcast. But I thought it was really good. And I thought Randy's conversation we went on for a while, but I was fascinated. So thank you everyone for joining us for this. Next week, we'll have Jeremy on with a number of students from J Street U. Thank you, Hannah, for making your first of what I expect will be many appearances to come on Word on the Street Live. And with that, bye.
Thank you so much.